I was around too, and in 2006 we started the deer management program here at the Park District, and hunting is a very useful tool for managing our deer populations. Again, the goal is kind of balanced native ecosystems. Just like, you know, hunting and trapping are the tools in our toolbox, like I said. Just like invasive species control we do at the Park District, we do prescribed fire. I've talked about that a little bit over some of these meetings. Doing this definitely helps us restore some balance to our ecosystems. So much so that I do like to, I didn't think, we're never going to probably bring these guys back, I don't think, to Ohio, unless, you know, maybe you guys would like me to start an introduction program here with these. That might be a little interesting if we try to get these guys back. But we no longer have these. These were in Ohio many, many years ago, and these were our natural predators, right? So deer are what are called a keystone species. Keystone species are animals or plants that really affect disproportionately all the other animals and plants in an ecosystem. So deer really have a huge effect on the forest community. And these are also keystone species too, right? Because they're top predators. So, did you realize though that, this is an interesting quote, I do like this. We had a long friend of the Park District, he was natural resource manager, John remembers, Tom Stanley. I like to read some of his notes and letters, and he came way back when we tried to get this program up and running with the park. He came and sat in on a lot of these meetings, the board meetings, and spoke about the need for hunting in Park Districts. But this is some pretty interesting stuff to read. You know, hunting is actually, in reality, an action that restores a natural predator to the park system, Park District. And hunting was a big way of way back when controlling deer and turkey numbers. So that's why we want to be doing hunting here in the Park District. And then just, you know, again, balanced. Our tools are archery and firearms. And I'm going to turn it over here now to talk about real quick some browse impact surveys. Browse is a way of determining kind of the effects of herbivores. And so Matt, with that, I'm going to give it to you. And then after you're done, I'll talk one more real quick, and then we'll be able to let Dennis speak too.
So my task in this was to create a kind of scientific and repeatable survey that could quantify the effects of deer in our parks. Luckily, back in the early 2000s, there was a survey that was made for Western Pennsylvania that I was able to adapt for our needs here at the Geauga Park District. So my first time that I did these surveys was the spring of 2022, and I did an abbreviated version in 2024 at Sunnybrook Preserve. So I have one spring of data for Swine Creek Observatory, the Rookery, Westwoods, and Flooring, and then 2 cycles of data from Sunnybrook. This is a transect-based survey, so I looked at all of our parks, tried to find areas that had a lot of forest where these deer are congregating and eating throughout the year, and that's how I chose these 6 parks. 2 more out in the eastern portion of the park, of the county, where very rural, a lot of hunting going on already in these areas. And then the other 4 a bit more western into the more developed portions of the county, leading into the Chagrin Valley. With these transects, every 100 feet, I would stop and create a circle with a 4-foot radius. It's about 50 square feet per plot. And the goal is to get as many samples as possible. That reduces any effects of outliers that you may have. If you have one plot that's really different from all the others, having a good sample size kind of pares that down into more usable data. And with these plots, I was looking at different aspects of our plant community, whether there was a presence of native and invasive species, our early spring ephemeral flowering plants, and just how deer may be affecting our native vegetation, either by eating the native trees or just basic presence, where I could say that there are deer in these areas. Ephemeral species are extremely important from about March through May. These are our first flowering plants during the year. They're extremely important for erosion control during those early spring rainfalls, and they're great for pollinators. When those first moths and butterflies and flies are coming out, these ephemerals are really important. And people come from all over the state, they follow the blooming ephemerals, so it's a great asset to have in our parks. And at all of my parks that I looked at, green is the presence of these native ephemerals, red means I did not have them in the plots. Places like Observatory, the Rookery, the Westwoods, most of those plots had a good variety of native ephemerals. Some of them, like Sunnybrook, Swine Creek, were a little hit or miss. And that in and of itself doesn't necessarily say that deer are browsing and destroying our ephemeral community, but deer have been known to eat trilliums, and they will sample some of the other native ephemerals that we have. And we have a great variety: Dutchman's breeches, trout lily, trilliums, cut leaf and two-leaved toothwort, jack in the pulpit, and spring beauties. All very popular. People come out and like to see these flowering plants either along the side of trails or deep in our forests. So it's great that we have that. And the diversity was a little variable depending on where we were. Observatory Park and the Westwoods, 14 or 15 different species of these native ephemerals throughout these two plots, or transect plots that I was doing. Sunnybrook actually increased from 4 to 7 species from 22 to 24. That's extremely encouraging. And Roaring Meadow had 6, kind of low, but still pretty nice to see these different species throughout our parks. And when it came to deer and actual woody vegetation, I was really interested to see how our native species were being affected by potential browsing activities. Great to see that very few plots in all 6 parks that I looked at didn't have any native regeneration. That's great. We like having native regeneration coming up, and only having 6 out of 60 plots at Swine Creek, if you extrapolate that, that's really good for the health of our forest community. 25 species were found throughout these 6 parks, and regeneration is typically anything from 6 inches tall to about 6 feet tall. That's what you're looking at for still fairly young trees that will still be in the range of what a deer can reach. Once it's out of that range, it's kind of considered an established mid-story tree at that point. There was considerable regeneration throughout all of our sites. The Westwoods had the least. I only found about 4 stems per plot at the Westwoods, but Sunnybrook, very good, 6 stems on average in 2022, which increased to about 8 stems in 2024. Swine Creek, out east in the southeast area of the county, where hunting is already pretty common, almost 7 stems, which is really encouraging. Observatory, Roaring Meadow, and the Rookery, anywhere from 4 to 5.5, and a little bit more than that per plot. If you extrapolate that out to an acre or an entire park, that's thousands and thousands of regenerative native trees. And that draws into question, are we seeing a lot of little trees building up and then getting knocked down by deer? Or are they actually escaping deer browse issues and becoming an established part of the community. That's something that through repeated measurements, I will soon be able to have actual trend data to see how that looks. But for now, it's kind of low on overall browse effect. But looking at a tree like maples, which were extremely common in Swine Creek and Sunnybrook, there was a statistically significant decrease in the amount of browse of maples at Swine Creek when compared to Sunnybrook, and which could have something to do with how much more hunting is going on in that southeastern portion of the county. And there was a lower amount of deer browse on maples at Sunnybrook in 2024 when compared to 2022. And with any sort of data, you can obviously put a line between 2 points and create a trend, but really what you need are multiple years of sampling to really see how these trends are looking. And that was a statistically significant difference in the amount of browse happening at Swine Creek when it came to maples. But deer are also eating other species in fairly small numbers. I did this on a 1 to 4 scale. 1 is no browse, 2 to 3 is kind of moderate to significant browse, and a 4 is just a tree getting totally topped off and basically killed by the amount of eating that was going on by the deer. Red oak or dogwood is a very commonly known deer attractant, and I saw that at the 2 parks that I actually had this species, which was the rookery and the westwoods. They averaged above a 2, which is pretty significant constant attraction to these individual trees. But other trees like the spice bush and the beech were kind of hit or miss. Deer were definitely going after these trees, but not in extreme amounts that was really impacting the regeneration qualities of them. Cherries and tulip poplar were also occasionally eaten, as well as hickory. And with that, again, that's 1 to 2 cycles of data, so I'm really excited to get out and see what the next year shows me. But there were definitely deer at all of these parks. You can go to any of our parks and find some sign of deer. The most common in the brown were scat piles, which are covered up every fall by the falling leaves, and then they start laying new ones out for me to find in the spring. So that's probably the best way to really quantify how many deer are in the area, is how many scat piles. Roaring Meadow, kind of a small forested region in the northern section, 14 scat piles were found throughout my transects. Sunnybrook, not too many. And the rookery and Swine Creek only 2, the rookery 9. So they are definitely in these areas. If I found deer trails, which are in the green, that's consistent deer movement rather than just meandering individuals or populations. So I am not totally sure yet which one is better, if I want to find these trails or not, but regardless, they were very common at the rookery and fairly common at Swine Creek. And I did see a couple of deer, actual living deer at Sunnybrook and Roaring Meadow, which is another great way to show that there are deer present, is if you can actually see them. But we do still have invasive plants that we have to control, and this was a great eye-opener for me going into some areas that normally we have no normal access to because they're just so far off our trails. But it was interesting to see how at Sunnybrook we have a lot of privet in the green and burning bush in the light blue, and observatory, Roaring, the rookery, the westwoods, and Swine Creek were mostly dominated by the glossy buckthorn and honeysuckle. The issue with non-native plants, although I did find that they were getting browsed occasionally by deer, they are normally going after our native plant community. So these non-native species have that extra chance, by not having any natural predators, to expand, grow out their massive root systems, and push up tons of saplings. So it's encouraging for us to know that we still have work to do to tamp down these non-native invasive species so that we can give these native woody plants their best chance at regeneration and survival. So I am excited to get back out there this coming winter and spring to get that next round of data.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, all right, thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. Some really cool data there. Lots of information, obviously, to cull through. But of course, this is do you know, so deer populations, if left under natural kind of really good conditions, deer will reproduce and replenish themselves at about 30 to 40% of the population every year. So we obviously really need to do something to help stem that and curtail that growth, that exponential growth curve that we saw. So the deer hunting program is a really good tool that we have here at the Park District, and it's a really good base. It's been a great collaborative effort. Every year I make recommendations to John and Dennis about, where there are important places that we should be hunting and protecting, where we're seeing trends, and I can't wait to keep this study going that Matt has. And the more years that we get into that data set, the more powerful and interesting things are going to become to talk about. But, again, it's a combination of the rangers, the Natural Resource Department folks here, administration folks doing all the heavy lifting with permits and dealing with phone calls every day and things like that. It's a lot of work, and I appreciate you all doing that. So if you have time, if you want Dennis to speak a little bit about some of the ranger involvement and safety, sure, that's fine. So thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Well, good morning. As Paul said, the first thing that we look at when this exchanges hands from Natural Resource Management over to the Ranger Department is Paul's recommendation. He